Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Melanie Shaw, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to share with you some of my best practices for chairing a dissertation or an ADP. This webinar is really designed to help you help your students, particularly at the pain points or the points of stuckness that tend to happen along the way. One of the very first challenges is helping students find a topic. They'll come to you with all kinds of ideas based on their professional experience or something they've read in a course that's excited them, but oftentimes helping them translate that into a feasible topic for doctoral appropriate research is a real challenge. One of the things that I have students do is turn to the literature. I begin to ask them to engage in those best literature searching practices to begin grounding their thinking in the peer-reviewed scholarship in the field. So what I'll have them do is go find 5 research-based articles written around the topic of interest from the past year. And then I teach them a little trick. The authors who are writing in the field in their publications will give tips and hints about gaps in knowledge that their research has exposed. And so I teach the students to check out the very last line of the abstract, which often contains a specific recommendation about future research needs. If they don't have luck there, I have them scroll down toward the bottom of the article and read in the conclusions where those recommendations typically are archived. And from those recommendations, I have the student create an assignment for me where they will write out what the authors of these 5 articles have recommended as gaps in knowledge. Then we take their topic idea and see if any of those gaps align and are of particular interest. And then we talk about how the student might execute those ideas into doctoral research for themselves. Once they've done that, I have them create a dream title that they would like to call their project. And from that title, I have them flip it into a question. And by asking that question, that becomes the big so what that they will answer in their research. This helps us make sure that it can be, in fact, articulated as a question and hence merit research. It also provides an opportunity for them to ensure that this is a particular path that they really do want to go down. There's nothing like having a student get deep into chapter 1 only to say, you know, I don't think this is where I really wanted to go after all. So having them frame that as that question up front can be a really quick way to help them align their ideas with their interests. One of the challenges that students often bring with them is that they want to use their doctoral research as an opportunity to teach something they already know. So we have a very early on conversation about how teaching is not part of the doctoral research process. Discovery is what doctoral research is about. So I have the students say what isn't known about the topic, particularly what they don't know about a topic. So if a student is saying to me, but I've worked in the field and I know that a best practice is this, I'll say, okay, then we don't need to do research. That best practice has already been discovered. What don't you know? And then once they've begun to unpack what they don't know, then we begin to search a little deeper and I say, how do you know that you don't know this? And again, that draws them back to the literature where they can say, well, you know, Smith and Jones noted this. However, they indicated that there is a gap in knowledge. So again, we're just reinforcing that idea that good research is grounded on what needs to be known, what we don't know, and you use the research to discover the unknown and further the field, further the knowledge in the field. Once the student has selected a topic, there are 3 main pain points that I find in chapter 1. The first is alignment, and this can become very apparent after the student begins to complete the problem statement and the purpose statement, the other two main pain points in chapter 1. I have students begin with the problem statement. If a student is an ADP student, it would be the justification statement, which operates much like a problem statement does in the traditional dissertation. I have the student craft the problem statement as just a 250-word nugget. And in that problem statement, I have them do 3 things. I have them identify what the problem is, as indicated in the literature. Whose problem is it? Who does this issue affect? This is getting at the particular population that they're going to study. And the final question I have them answer in that problem statement is, what happens if the problem isn't solved? I tell my students when they're writing their problem statement that they should imagine horror movie music playing in the background. If the problem statement language doesn't fit that urgent, scary sounding music, they probably missed the mark, and they're probably conflating the problem statement with the purpose statement. The problem statement needs to leave the reader feeling unsettled, troubled, like there's something that must be done. And the student's research is going to do the thing to address the problem. But I don't want them to resolve the problem in the problem statement. I want them to leave me with that cliffhanger, with that horror movie music playing in their heads in the background. Once they've got the problem statement beautifully articulated, I have them write the purpose statement. And in the purpose statement, I have them use the very first line to articulate what the methodology is going to be and what the research design is going to be. I find that by helping students identify that very early in the process, it allows us real clarity about how they're going to go about this research. Oftentimes, the student gets to the research questions and realizes that the data needed to answer the questions isn't where they wanted to go and won't ultimately resolve the problem. When that happens, we realize we have an alignment issue. And the alignment issue can be one of the most difficult things to address. But once it's addressed early on, I find that the rest of the research flows so much more smoothly. So I wanted to share with you a tool that I have borrowed liberally from many colleagues that helps really drill down with the student about this alignment. It's called the alignment worksheet. And it's just 3 sentences long. And I have the student complete these 3 sentences. The problem is, with that horror movie music playing in their heads in the background. The purpose is, and the research question is. Now I'll tell the student that the language in these 3 sections should be almost identical. Here's what it looks like when the student finally nails it. Here's an example for you. The problem is school counselors are unable to provide career planning services to students because of COVID-19. Now, of course, in the 250-word version of their problem statement, they would have all kinds of peer-reviewed citations to support that assertion of the problem. But you can hear the urgency. This is a problem. We're going to leave students without that career planning service. They're not going to be prepared for workforce readiness without this. So we have to do something to solve it. It's not yet solved. It's still an existing problem. So the purpose is, and you'll notice here the language is very similar, to find strategies that school counselors can use to provide career planning services to students during the pandemic. So the language of one becomes the language of the other in order to fulfill the problem. And take a look at what the language of the research question is. The research question is, what strategies can be used to provide career planning services to students during the pandemic? When you've got that language aligned, when the words used in the problem are the words used in the purpose and the words used in the research question, you know you've got that clear articulation of alignment. And you know that answering that research question, finding those strategies that can be used by counselors to provide career planning will ultimately solve that problem. It's a worthwhile research. It gets at the heart of the solution and lives out the purpose of that. Having students create these one-sentence articulations of alignment really does help highlight where their thinking is askew. You won't be surprised probably to learn that sometimes it takes 5 to 10 iterations of this to actually get the student to a place of alignment. So keep at it, keep working with the student. And when it's stripped down this simply, I find that the students are easily able to pick this up once they've got that articulation there, and then expand those sticking points in chapter 1. Chapter 2 can be an overwhelming exercise for students. Typically, it is a big learning curve for them about the differences between summarizing sources and synthesizing sources. Students will often turn in a portion of a literature review that looks a lot like an annotated bibliography because they haven't learned how to blend those ideas together around the themes that emerge. So one of the first things that I have students do is to take their problem statement, purpose statement, and research questions. And remember, if the alignment is there, the words should be very similar in those sections. I have the students highlight for me the key terms in each of those 3 sections. Those key terms become the major themes in their literature review. After they've highlighted those key terms, I have them find synonyms for those terms. School counselor might be school psychologist, might be guidance counselor in our previous example. So having students find the various words that may be used in the literature, naming conventions of the articles, helps them to begin to craft some ideas around those terms that they'll use when they go into the library databases to find the articles that they'll use. I then have them practice using Boolean operators, and, or, not, to begin to refine their search. I often will have them use Google Scholar as a quick way to delimit the findings to just the past 2 years. If the students are finding millions of articles around their topic, it's a good indication that they may still be too broad and may need to narrow in. And so we talk about strategies to do that, limiting by geographic region or by some demographic factor of the population. Finding ways to sort of zoom in a little bit if there are too many searches that result from these keywords. Once the students have a list of those synonyms for the key terms, then I have them create a concept map where they begin to show the interrelationships of those themes. And that can really be a helpful way to help them begin synthesizing the way that the ideas are connected. And then when they begin their literature review, they've got a good framework for how to organize and synthesize the findings. In chapter 3, I find that there is, I liken this chapter to the how-to manual of the research study. This is where someone should be able to pick up chapter 3 and read it and exactly to the most granular detail, replicate that research. If there isn't sufficient research, information in that chapter for someone to replicate it without reading the rest of the ADP or the dissertation, then the student hasn't provided enough detail and context. So what I'll have my students do is to begin at that data collection and analysis point in the chapter. I have them write almost like a step-by-step guide of how they're going to implement the data collection and then analyze those data. Once that's done, the student has a very clear framework for not only the research methodology and design and why the selected methodology and design are the appropriate choice for this particular research, but they also now know how there are limitations around this approach. What are the gaps? What are the warts of the approach? What are the assumptions that the student is making? What are the assumptions that the student assumes the participants will be making? So to have that articulated in that how-to guide kind of approach really gives the student an opportunity to understand those limitations, assumptions, and delimitations, the specific things they're doing to narrow in on the findings. Once they've done that, once they've got a very clear how-to manual, if you will, on the data collection and analysis sections, I have them go back and work backwards to write the rest of the chapter, because that how-to guide really provides the structure needed for them to be successful. In the ADP, we just have 4 chapters. In the dissertation, we have chapters 4 and 5. So the ADP condenses these final 2 chapters into one. So I use a very similar approach. The first thing I do is I have the student organize by research question. They're going to organize the results, the sharing of those findings, and then also the implications, what those findings mean. I find that by helping the student create that framework of research question, that ultimately they're answering the research questions and have a very good organizational scheme. If they're doing a quantitative study, I have them in the results section actually say if they are accepting or not accepting the null hypothesis as sort of the final piece of that. Of course, if they're doing a qualitative study, then I'm going to want to see those themes, and the ultimate reading of those themes should be the answer to that research question. So I have the student read through their findings and then look back at that research question, and I'll say, do you have an answer to the research question based on what you have here? Thankfully, that's almost always yes. The student can clearly see the answer, and if not, they need to go back and reanalyze and make sure that the findings do in fact inform the answer to the research question. Those data should answer the research questions. If they don't, the student has gone off track somewhere and we need to circle back and figure out where that issue is. There's a lot of reviews that happen at this stage, lots of back and forth. And so while the student is waiting on those reviews, I have them go back and look at chapter 2. I have them take their 2 buckets of their research questions, or 3 buckets or 4 buckets, depending on how many research questions they have. And I have them sort those into agrees and disagrees. And then I have them identify which of the literature goes into which of those buckets around those organizational themes of the research questions. That way, when the student gets to the implications and they need to talk about their findings and then juxtapose those with the findings in the literature review, they've already got the scheme. They've already got it lumped into an agree and a disagree with, so it becomes very easy to juxtapose and compare and contrast the previous literature. And that's a great way to have them be working ahead while there are reviews and back and forths going on during these final 2 chapters, or 1 chapter in the case of the ADP. Then once we've done that, I have the student identify what it does to fulfill the professional knowledge, how the findings can be used, and then also what those gaps in professional knowledge are and what those gaps in research. This is the first line of the abstract and the last part of that conclusion that the student did at the very beginning when they were honing in on the topic. They're now creating their own versions of that to show that they have exposed gaps in knowledge through their research, which of course is a best practice. That is not a limitation. We want them to know what additional areas of inquiry there are. I like to believe that chunking the journey into bite-sized pieces really does help with motility, helps keep the student moving forward. If the students are so focused on the overall journey that they can't see those individual steps, it can be overwhelming. They can just throw up their hands and say, I can't do this, I can't write a 40-page literature review, or I can't overcome this alignment issue. So by helping them strip it away to the most fundamental elements, have them work on one section at a time or one sentence at a time, as you saw in the alignment worksheet, that really helps the students feel that they're having success and that they're accomplishing pieces of the journey. And that really does reinforce their intrinsic motivation to get it done. Try everything you can to help the students avoid that holistic journey syndrome where they overthink the process and really create consternation with themselves for not being able to move rapidly through. By creating those bite-sized pieces, the students can almost check them off as they go along. That checklist approach can really reinforce some positive behaviors. The last piece of guidance that I want to share with you all is that sometimes students will lose touch with the work because they get so frustrated. I read a wonderful book when I was doing my own dissertation called How to Write Your Dissertation in 15 Minutes a Day. And the punchline for that approach is that you just need to touch it every single day. You need to be doing something. Sometimes those 15 minutes a day will turn into an hour a day or 3 hours on a weekend. But if the student will commit to themselves to working on it 15 minutes a day, they will get it done. So encourage your students to make this a part of their day as much as they would exercise or eating a meal or whatever their other habitual parts of their routine are. It can be first thing in the morning, it can be last thing at night, but to have the students just ensure that they are in fact circling back to their work each and every day for at least 15 minutes will allow them to complete the journey. And that's all I have for you. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. My name is Melanie Shaw. You can find me in our email address directory. I am so honored to have shared this information with you and look forward to learning further tips and tricks from each of you as we continue our professional exploration of best practices. Thank you.